So yeah, I can see we're starting to get a few people coming into the room now, so we shall begin. Welcome once again, everyone, to this week's episode of Event Insights. My name is Chrissy. I'm head of content with Safe Events, and joining us today we have Garda John O'Sullivan. John, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm glad to be inside in front of a computer rather than out. So it's a nice break, and it's nice to be doing something a little bit more, a little different for a change.
So, speaking of a little different, this is quite a unique episode, actually. John and I were just having a little chat about this. So, John is going to take us through today on the different kind of ins and outs on working on events around water, around bodies of water, and in particular, the different kind of documentation and things that will need to be in place before these events happen. So, it's really good to actually get a Garda perspective on this because, as we were just saying before we opened the room here, it streamlines things a lot more for the event organizers, and also it helps the police force be able to do their job more easily as well. So, John, I'll pass it over to yourself there. Just to let everyone know, as usual, this session will be recorded. We'll have it up on our YouTube page before the end of the week, and we'll send everyone an email with that link. And then also there will be some time for some Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to pop them in the chat and John will take a look at them.
Perfect. So I'll just turn on my screen share there. Now, you're able to see that okay, I take it?
Yeah, that's coming up perfectly now.
Lovely. Okay, so this is new for me as well. This is kind of a fundamental view from a policing perspective in relation to events, and it's an area of interest I have. I'm certainly not an expert, but I suppose in lieu of that, I know people who are, and I know where to access the information when I need it. So what I'm going to cover off in this is, and feel free to ask me questions at the end, and if I can't answer them, I certainly know somebody who will. So I'll give a brief introduction about myself, the role of An Garda Síochána, so Ireland's police service, in event planning, licensed events on or near the water. It's pretty niche, but this will reflect other, I suppose, nuanced environments and environmental considerations for events going forward. I'll discuss event management plans from our perspectives, what we're looking for in risk assessments. I'll have a brief conversation around routine incidents versus major emergencies and how they fit into event management plans and our responses, and then a conversation around effective and efficient responses to routine incidents, or what we would kind of class as normal incidents. So a brief introduction of myself. I'm a member of An Garda Síochána, which is Ireland's police service, and I'm attached to community policing in Limerick City, that's on the west coast of Ireland. And as part of community policing, we fulfill community engagement, and we reach out to groups, we work with the communities, so we take a more proactive rather than a reactive approach, and this falls into that bracket. So I recently completed a master's in emergency management, routinely consult on event safety in relation to more nuanced aspects. I regularly complete disaster and crisis management courses with the International Police Association, and I'm quite junior in my role, so I have 6 years service, and prior to that I spent the majority of my working life at sea in a variety of different backgrounds. So most recently with the Royal National Lifeboat Institute as a volunteer and mechanic, and as a sea fisheries scientist working offshore. So within my own division then, aside from community policing, I assist management here as best I can, and I'm involved in major emergency management exercising and event management where deemed appropriate by my supervisors or superiors. I am of Garda rank, which is the most junior rank in the organisation, and my role, when required, is to assist particularly the inspector over major emergency management, who's an individual 2 ranks above me, and he answers to the chief superintendent and the superintendent of the division. So what I'm saying must be taken in the context of that I am in Garda rank. I am not a decision maker, but I assist those who do make the decisions, particularly in terms of paperwork, documentation, and having a look at what's there, particularly in terms of what is my area of interest, water-based incidents. So the role of An Garda Síochána in event planning, and this is quite broad, and then we narrow it down ourselves. So our primary role is the protection of life. That is our concern, followed by property. And then we will deal with any criminal matters thereafter. So we view everything through the prism of an individual's constitutional rights, their human rights. And in terms of events, that goes for the organisers, participants, and the broader community. So we're interested in health, safety, welfare, and just make sure things are run safely and to mitigate any threat in advance. As part of that then, our role on the day of an event or the night of an event is to maintain peace and order and liaise and work with event teams to make sure their event is going okay and assist where we can and where we're needed. So we will work with the event team, and then external to that, we will be monitoring and identifying any potential threats, both within the event or external to it. We look at the application of different legislation. So event organisers in Ireland and abroad, they will operate under key pieces of legislation, and we will seek to operate under that and make sure that anybody involved in an event is operating within those limits as well. So we liaise with PRAs and key stakeholders. That's both with the event management team, and we'll do it externally. So PRA is a principal response agency. There are 3 of them in Ireland, so ourselves and Garda Síochána. We have the HSE, which is the Health Service Executive, and we have the local authority, and falling under the local authority is planning, environmental. We have our fire service and civil defence where required. We will also step in, depending on which agency is appropriate, if there are routine incidents or if there is the declaration of a major emergency, and that falls into the lead agency concept. So depending on who is most appropriate to respond, they will step in, and if it is ourselves, we will step in that case, and that will be handed over to a Garda officer, so a rank senior to myself, on the day. So when we're submitted documents then by event organisers and the team, our job is to validate and stress test those documents. So we want to make sure that what is written both reflects the environment, and if it says something is going to happen, then we want to make sure that it will, and that allows us to plan ourselves and develop a policing plan. The application of the plan is key. So we do work off of that. Our documents are developed off of that, and it offers an insight into what we can expect on the night and how to plan our resources. It also dictates how we engage with other stakeholders. So licensed events on or near the water is my area of interest. So in Limerick City, we have the Shannon running through the centre of the city. It divides 2 aspects of our policing area, our 2 areas. And we have an area where we have the sea meets the river. So we have both the maritime and riverine environment, which makes the environment quite complex. We have a significant tidal range, which can be 4 or 5 meters, and there can be significant flow. We have historic legacy infrastructure that is of significant concern to first responders and concerns us in around event planning. But these concerns are reflected really across Ireland and Europe, because the majority of significant population centres are on or close to water. So we look at in Europe, or the United Nations risk register. So pre-pandemic, top of the risk register would have been a pandemic, and now we've moved into environmental impacts and environmental issues. So although river has always been there, what we can plan for is environmental impacts as much. So we have to be cognizant of that. So they form the backdrop to many events. So you'll see the image there. This comes from Riverfest this year. So we had a fireworks display on the river, and we were expecting anywhere between 15 and 30,000 people on the river. So this feature, the river, curtails the crowd, it restricts their movement, and we have to be cognizant of how it impacts with the broader community and other plans that are in place. So it presents issues for access and egress. So when people are in a confined area, an area that's not purpose-built for events, we look to see how we manage emergency access when and if something does happen, so sterile access, and then how it overlaps with other emergency plans. Events like this, where you have an environment that is in effect sterile and is overlooked by thousands of people, you have a lot of individuals who can see an area. So if an incident happens in this area, services and the information services can be somewhat overwhelmed. If somebody enters the water in Limerick City at this event, you potentially have 15,000 people with the capability of accessing emergency services. And then we're concerned about would-be rescuers attempting their own rescue. So there's huge concerns around this, and we try to plan and mitigate that. So when we look at planning, this is at the forefront of our minds. And, environments like this, on a night like this event happened, the environment looked quite benign, but the reality of it was a capricious and very dangerous environment where survival times in cold water were questionable. You have weirs, you have significant flow. So we're trying to plan for that. In an environment like that. So establishing who's responsible for what area is key. So, to be cognizant of the grey space, who's responsible for, managing safety. So for something like an environment like this, the event organizer is responsible for safety. So there would be an expectancy of some mitigation put in place. Working with ourselves, and then if there is an incident or an issue, then the principal response agencies would be activated. But where you have time critical incidents, they really need to be thought out and planned out, and we need to engage with local stakeholders and subject matter experts. So in relation to planning then, so the event management plan for these events, I suppose from my point of view, a key thing is these documents, so your event management plan, your safety plan, communications plan, and then our policing plan, they're only as good as the stakeholder engagement. So the event management plan obviously setting out what's going to happen, how, when and where, and we will be looking at that and make sure that it reflects the operational environment. And it's key to licensing. From my own point of view, and I'm not been in any way critical of anybody, maybe more so ourselves, but these plans, what we do is, and what I do is, when I get them, I read them and I go through them very carefully, and I make sure what is set out is as it should be. And if I don't know the answer, I will seek it out. What I don't like to see is documentation that is not appropriate, not fit for purpose, and not representative of the operational environment. Paste and copy and templates are a significant concern, and that transfers the whole way through to risk assessments. Safety plan must be appropriate. This is our bread and butter. This is where I have a huge concern over. what's set out in the safety plan, it must be accurate, it must be efficient, and it must allow us to respond on the night. And that takes significant stakeholder collaboration. And collaboration is a key term here. Event organisers, there's a significant amount of pressure on them, but there is an obligation on Garda Síochána and the other principal response agencies to engage with event organisers, rather than just allowing individuals or groups to develop plans on their own, because it just won't work. So from the earliest stages, plans should be developed with stakeholder engagement in mind. Safety plan must work. So key things that I'm looking at are communications plans. Do they work? Are they fit for purpose? What is the means of communications? Does it make sense? Activation pathways. In Limerick and for events, we have Tetra radio, VHF marine radio. Event teams will have their own radios. We have access to emergency services through 112 or 999. There's a lot of clutter in this, so clear activation pathways are very important, and they must overlap then with what the HSE are happy with and what the fire service are happy with. So just clarity is hugely important. And then when we're satisfied with all of this, we develop our policing plan on that to manage what's happening in this event. So each one is the precursor to the other. I operate under the assumption that at an event, something will happen. And when I operate under that assumption, I find I'm far better prepared. And when we had Riverfest, so this year we were lucky enough that it was without incident, and that makes me doubly worried for next year, because it is unlikely that 2 years in a row we will be as lucky. And with the concern of the end user in mind, so that the potential casualty or patrons for the event, we're cognizant that these plans, that they really do work well. Risk assessments. So site-specific risks, and this goes back to copy and paste and appropriate risk assessment. So I'm looking for mitigation, appropriate and effective mitigation that's realistic, that everyone in the events team and ourselves can understand, can enact, and they're able to impart that information. So risk assessments in effect should be empowering documents that when they're read or accessed by any of your team, they should be straightforward, they should make sense, and they should reflect the operational environment. It's a reasonable worst case scenario. So, we are planning for an incident that will happen. So we will look at the environment at the time when it's due to happen. We'll take tides, weather, everything into consideration, and we will put in place scenarios, and we will operate off of them. So we will try and plan for them. While, of course, no plan survives first contact, but it puts us in a good place. Appropriate and realistic mitigation, walk the location with those who know. I think walk the location with stakeholders is hugely important. And I think back to the Callan report, I think it was the Swedish House Mafia concert in Phoenix Park, if I'm not mistaken. And what came out of that was you need to walk the ground in advance, with the stakeholders and really get an understanding. If your event is at night, you're going to have a high tide. If we're looking at water events, then walk it at night at a high tide. Really understand the environment and cast a wide net on your stakeholders. It should, be an empowering experience and really set you up. Again, we discussed the vulnerability of grey space. Really understand who's responsible for what. Establish grey space, where it is, how to mitigate access, and what happens, if something does happen in that area. And then these documents, there must be an evolution. It's really important that they do evolve. So last year's document, it won't work this year. The majority will, I have no doubt. So what I look for is recent incidents, So when we're looking at maritime or riverine incidents, I will always look to the Marine Casualty Investigation Board, and I will look for outcomes in relation to recent incidents that might have a bearing. And new documentation submitted by event organisers should reflect the outcomes of what these statutory bodies are suggesting. So if the Marine Casualty Investigation Board is putting in place recommendations, we are having an event near a river or the water, and we don't enact that or we don't suggest that as a principal response agency, I feel we are falling short. So it would be my role then to highlight that to our management team. Routine versus major emergencies. When I'm reviewing documents, there's a huge emphasis on the MEM framework, the Major Emergency Management Framework, which is important. Don't get me wrong, it is hugely important. But major emergencies at events are rare. So the same level of detail and focus needs to go into dealing with routine incidents. So in terms of major emergencies at events in Ireland, we've been lucky, but routine incidents are constant. So the same level of planning needs to go in. We are going to have incidents, as people in the events industry are aware, and we'll accept that and we will plan for them. So emphasis in many planning documents, as I said, on major emergencies, and just if the same level of detail goes in as major emergency planning as it does for site-specific routine incidents, I think would be in a good place. Routine incident. So for us, one person entering the water is a routine incident. Boardwalk collapse, we're verging on a significant emergency where local resources may be overwhelmed. And, again, I've said activation pathways, they just need to be really clear, well established, and everybody in the team, from the guard on the ground to the security steward, is aware. And this ties in then to wicked problems. So a small incident snowballing and creating a much larger incident. When we're looking at incident or emergency planning for events, especially in terms of water or other nuanced incidents, we look at how our own major emergency plans overlap. So event management plans, safety plans, comms plans, they're never assessed in singularities. So in Limerick, for example, we have multiple major emergency plans, and we will look at them side by side with the event plan. That, to be fair, the event management team, they don't have oversight of. So our expectations only fairly should be set out very early on and should be very clear. Effective and efficient response. So, this comes back to our risk assessments and our planning, liaising with subject matter experts, know who they are and know who the key stakeholders are. It's really important. It's unfair to accept or to expect people who are experts in the event industry to be experts in search and rescue in complex environments. It is expected that the principal response agencies should be willing and should be there to assist them as much as is practicable without drawing up the plans, but we are there to assist. The OARS principle is what our colleagues in Coast Guard use, and to surmise it, we overreact in these environments. So we want to overreact to every incident with the expectation that it is going to get worse. These incidents are time critical. And by the time we're handing over to a lead agency, we're already well embedded in an incident. So an example for a water-based incident, and something that is of significant concern to me, is an individual entering the water, which, I don't want to say it happened routinely, but it does happen regularly at these large events. There would be an expectancy that an event safety team would respond, principal response agencies would be activated, but that safety team on the water, they have to really react effectively, because Depending on the area, you're looking at a 5-6 minute call out time. Your principal response agencies, your fire service, your Coast Guard, they can be retasked and redeployed at any time. And this goes for any event where there's kind of an environmental concern. So they cannot be depended on for safety cover for events at all. So event organizers need to put in place their own safety teams, and then we will assist where possible by all means. So, we need to be cognizant. Is the tide in, out? Is the equipment appropriate? When a casualty is in the water, I'm concerned over rescue adverse casualties. So are the teams appropriately trained? If we have a significant crowd looking out at an incident, are we going to have members of the crowd entering the water, which has happened? It's happened recently in other events. So now we have to rescue 3 and 4 people, and these can snowball quickly. I suppose it's important to caveat what I'm saying and what I'm asking. This is first-hand experience. So I have been at events where individuals have entered the water, and people have entered the water in an attempt to rescue them. Activation pathways become cluttered, and there's a huge amount of information that we must kind of wade through to effect an appropriate response. So these do happen. They will happen on the water and in other complex environments. Handing over to a lead agency, that's fine. There is still a time lag. For water-based environments or marine environments, locally we're looking at the fire service, but in other areas it might be the Royal National Lifeboat Institute, the Irish Coast Guard, or a combination of all 3. So in the interim, there'll be on-scene coordinators, so somebody will take initial responsibility from a principal response agency, and then it'll be handed over to an on-scene commander, and then the incident will be managed, from there. So communication. This is really key for us, and how we manage these incidents. So in terms of communication and information, we'll be keeping a decision log. We'll be managing our perception versus our action at the time. Everything will be recorded. There would be an expectancy that event management teams do the same. If somebody is unfortunate enough to pass away at an event, or an incident is significant enough, we will be in court. So to have appropriate recording mechanisms is hugely important. And then I suppose in terms of the decision-making process, I think it was Powell was saying that, we have to wait until we have 40% of the information before we can act in a meaningful way. But if we're waiting for more than 70, we've waited too long. So we have to respond with information that's available, and we must be cognizant of that in planning. And then key after any incident is the debrief, and how we can improve the next event and what we're going to learn from it. I suppose what's really important for me is, training prepares us for events we understand and what we know. Education prepares us for the unknown. And documents and approaches to incidents, they must evolve. So the emergency services must evolve, event management teams and organisers, they must evolve. And, and we do that collectively. We work together to try and understand these risks. And I think with that environmental register, environmental risks coming to the fore, even on greenfield sites, flooding, access and egress for emergency services, this to be reflected in event documents is really important. And it's something I want to see. Now, whether my inspector reflects that, or my superintendent or my chief superintendent, they make the decision. So when we're looking at documents, I read it, my inspector reads it, and then we have our chief superintendent or superintendent makes the decision. And my limited role is to empower those above me as much as I can. And it just comes back to reading the documentation. So that is everything for me. It's kind of I suppose it's a broad presentation on such a nuanced incident or nuanced incidents, but just to start engagement and to start discussing it with our colleagues in the event industry, I think is hugely important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks very much for that, John. As you said, and as we were kind of saying before this call, it really is all about collaboration and everyone just knowing what they're doing and knowing what kind of needs to be done before any incidents actually happen. So thanks very much for going through that. As John said, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and pop them in on the right-hand side here. John, I suppose it can take a minute or two for people to think of stuff. In the meantime, do you have any recent stories? I know you were kind of saying, was it Riverfest it was called in Limerick?
Yes, yeah, I suppose that would be one of the bigger events that we deal with in the city, yeah.
Yeah, and are there, aside from just people getting into the water, are there any kind of routine things that tend to happen every year at that you'd watch out for?
So we're dealing with events where, especially we look at fireworks events, they're at their best when they're at night. Although they're family events, we're looking at crowds that are, a percentage will be intoxicated. And we're looking that is reflected in event documentation because the risk threshold is far higher for intoxicated crowds. And when they're mixing with young people or children, and you combine that with complex environments or environments that present a significant hazard, then, we are concerned. Events, so public order, complicated by these incidents. So public order is, I suppose, a broad term for any kind of public disorder that is going to have a broader impact on the safety of the individual or their peers in the area. And if that's complicated by a hazard, then there's a significant concern. So what I would have seen is locally, for every 10,000 people, we would look maybe at between 5 and 10 reasonable public order incidents where we would have arrests, and then one maybe more significant, requiring a more kind of specific approach or more targeted approach. But when you combine it with hazards, so Riverfest is a good example, where we had people entering the water historically away from the event, which drew safety cover by the statutory organisations away. So the safety teams that were left were provided by the event organiser, so they had to be appropriate, and that is something that we're really looking for.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And that's an interesting point you bring up, actually, because as you said, people kind of got into the water further away from the event.
Yeah.
So something to look out for is really to expand kind of reach that you're looking at for your safety team, and then also have extras on hand for if some get called away.
Yeah, I suppose a concern we had recently was the vast majority of the crowd were on one side of the river. So between 15,000, 30,000 people, the tide was going to be out. So a lot of the area that would normally be covered by water, there wouldn't have been access by a boat. So how do you effectively respond when you can't get a boat up there? So then you need to get crews on land up there quickly. So then how do we get crews up there? So, we put in sterile access and egress, and the event team, they work closely with us. And I think what we came up with, both the event organisers and ourselves, was that if something had happened, there was a significant improvement in our ability to respond. And how it was managed by the event team, in fairness to them, was excellent. And going forward, it's something we'll be implementing. And that how it was implemented, that was devised by the event organisers, and they must be commended. And if we needed it, we would have been in a really good stead. Now that put us in a good place for public order, if we had to respond to a health incident, if we had to get an ambulance up there, or if we had to put somebody in the water, it was all the same. So sterile access and egress to every area at all times was key,
I see. Very good. Okay, well, I'm seeing we don't have any questions coming in, so I think you probably covered everything that everyone was wondering there. As usual, guys, if anything does come up afterwards, if you have any questions you want me to send along, feel free to fire them across my way. And in the meantime, thanks again, John. That was really, really interesting.
Lovely. Thanks very much for having me. And any questions, people are more than welcome to get in contact with me, and I'll try and answer them.
All right, cheers. Well, have a great day, everyone.